The vast majority of people use cases with their smartphones, and when you're traveling a lot of people tend to also buy battery banks. You know, our phones are basically running our entire lives. We're all debating what's gonna replace the smartphone, if anything can. So there's been this blossoming accessory space over cases and battery banks and attachments and modules, and there's a lot of boredom that goes on in the smartphone community between everything kind of looks the same. Google, Samsung, Apple, you're all just making, big display glass rectangles with thin bezels, and I want to see something unique. I want to see something different. Well, in today's video, we're addressing all of these subjects with one crazy phone called the Doogee S100 Pro. It's a mouthful, but so is the phone. So yes, in all my years of covering iPhones and Pixels and Galaxies, the one company that decided to actually start sending me phones early was a Chinese brand called Doogee, who emailed me 34 times to review this phone, and 33 times I said no. Mostly because I knew this was an Apple-focused channel primarily, and I'd kind of taken a break from Androids. But more recently, we've been diving more into more budget-focused Androids, and this phone, as crazy as the design is, starts at $500 US. And it could be different in different markets because this is definitely targeted at international markets as well as the US, even though I'm pretty sure it's restricted to just T-Mobile carriers. So that includes Mint Mobile, but if you're on Verizon or AT&T, I guess this phone is not for you. But while we complain a lot about smartphones not being innovative enough, or a lot of you asking for camera bumps to go away so we can eliminate the wobble, or I've seen a lot of people every single year when there's a bigger and bigger iPhone camera bump say, why don't you just make the entire back of the phone bigger? That way the battery's bigger and you eliminate the camera bump. Okay, Apple won't listen to you, Google won't listen to you, or Samsung. Doogee listened, because this entire phone is a camera bump. But the main focus with the S100 Pro was, as you can tell, durability. No, this is not a case. This is not some accessory. This is literally how the phone comes out of the box. But also on top of that, they include a screen protector in case you needed even more protection. I will admit, as weird of a brand as this was, and I wasn't really aware of them before, I had to look them up to make sure they weren't a scam company. This phone is kind of fresh in a world of thin glass rectangles with giant camera bumps. They decided we're gonna do one thing really, really well with this phone, and that is battery life. You know, most phones out there have somewhere between a 4,000 milliamp hour to 5,000 milliamp hour battery life. This phone has 22,000 milliamp hours, which yes, translates to an astoundingly good battery life. You can go 4 to 5 days on a single charge with this phone, which is incredibly rare, especially in the $500 smartphone bracket space. And on top of that, the display is not the prettiest thing in the world, but I've said before, I prefer the teardrop notch to the camera hole cutout, and they accommodated for that on this. And it does have thinner bezels than my iPhone SE2, so I gotta give it some credit for that on the affordability sector. And while it's not an OLED panel, it is 120 hertz. So it doesn't get super bright, but the screen is buttery smooth. But of course, a phone with a battery life this good and a display with a refresh rate that high does have to come with some compromises, right? Aside from the fact that yes, it's built like a tank, and I would love to do a drop test with you, but I'm afraid it would break the tile or the cement that I would drop this on. But that doesn't mean Doogee didn't do some official IP certification. So this phone is actually a step above most other phones. So majority of flagships out there are IP68 water resistant. This phone is IP69K, which puts it in the bracket of like, it can handle pressure washers throwing some water on it, which is crazy when you consider this thing has a fingernail equipped SIM card, which also spots your micro SD card expansion if you want more storage than the included 256 gigs. But yeah, you don't need a SIM tool to open this thing up, which is pretty great. It has a fingerprint reader in the power button, so they went pretty cheap on that, but it also has something the iPhone 15 is probably going to have, an action button that can be programmed on the side to do whatever you want. So when I hold mine down, it activates the flash. But yeah, also, there's more than just one flash on the back. There is has this giant camping light that looks like the Chevron logo with a dedicated app that constantly warns you, be careful, this light gets super duper bright, don't shine it in your eyes. And really don't do it because it's quite dangerous. But yes, this light gets absurdly bright compared to most other flashes on the back of phones, which as niche as this phone is, it's just kind of interesting in my opinion to finally find some new phones coming out there these days that are not trying to blend in with the rest of the smartphone market. They don't care if this thing is heavy or thick or bulky. Yeah, I'll admit, it doesn't fit in your pocket all that well. You need to have really, really deep pockets in order to hold this phone. And I don't mean money, I just mean literal pockets. Definitely don't use this thing late at night holding over your face, because if you start to get sleepy and it drops on you, it could fracture your skull. And I wish I was joking about that. This phone is nearly 1 pound. It's more than twice as heavy as the heaviest iPhone, the 14 Pro Max. And also, like the iPhone 15 is likely going to be rocking later this year, it has USB-C and a built-in way to conceal that USB-C port to make it extra water resistant, which I'm grateful for. So where are the compromises, you may be wondering? This seems like some kind of super Android phone that's not too expensive. Well, I am sad to report that yes, the camera quality is not all that great. It technically has a 108 megapixel sensor, so it sounds good on paper, but the depth of field is so shallow it's nearly impossible to get anything in focus. If you're looking at a great landscape and you have a lot of light, that's when it tends to perform fairly well. But if you're in darker environments or you're doing close-ups, it just looks very noisy and very pixelated. So the camera is probably worse than a Pixel phone from 3 years ago. I wouldn't recommend this phone if you're just looking for a great camera. But in that same subject of it being a niche product, this also rocks something that most phones don't have, an infrared camera. So this is going to work a lot better for dark video situations, but we don't have night mode for video on most of our smartphones. You have to resort to just turning on the flash, but this can actually see in the dark very clearly, and you don't need a flashlight, and it doesn't rely on any kind of post-processing. So honestly, I'm super impressed because I guess infrared cameras have been a thing for a long time, but having one built into a phone so that in super dark environments you can just see everything as if you have a flashlight on, great for if you're making a found footage movie. It's weird, it's not something everybody asks for, but it's cool, and it's something this phone is rocking, as well as a built-in lanyard strap, which I don't know why you would want to strap this to something. I guess they intend you to strap it to your tent or something, but yeah, this does more than your average smartphone, and less than your average smartphone. I wish I could treat it as more of a mobile battery bank that just happens to run Android on my trips, because obviously when I'm taking trips like this, I'm going to want a decent camera to document the experience. But what I found out about the USB-C port when I tried to charge other devices is it limits the power output to just 3 watts. So if it could output power a bit better, it would probably even charge my MacBook Pro. Like when I plug this into my MacBook acts like it's charging, but it's not getting enough power from the USB-C port to actually increase the percentage. I can just barely charge my iPhone SE2 with this port. 3 watts is slower than the 5 watt brick. It's really, really slow, so I can't say this is a great purchase if you're just looking for a battery bank with Android. But because it has 256 gigs of storage and a beautiful 120 hertz display, this has been really, really helpful on my trips, especially when I'm taking some long flights or a long boat ride. When I have internet, I will download a ton of YouTube videos thanks to YouTube Premium and YouTube Music, and this just became my ultimate media consumption device because literally I haven't charged it since I left the house. The battery life in it is that good. You don't have to fuss around with, oh, let me get the cable out, let me get my battery bank out, or let me make sure I buy the right case for my phone so it's protected while I'm traveling and out in the wild, moving around a lot. No, this phone, you just buy it, take it out of the box, and boom, it's ready to go. Week-long battery life, plus great durability, and a great display for media consumption if you don't care much about OLED and HDR. I just appreciate high refresh rate and good pixel density, which this has. So it's kind of been my secondary phone for a while, and thankfully, Doogee is comfortable with me keeping it. I made sure of that. They didn't want me to send it back, and I've been using it with my AirPods Pro, which I've actually never done before, but I realized, oh yeah, my AirPods can connect to Android phones, and and they work really great with this phone, which is good because also the speakers on this thing are not very good. They're fairly symmetrical on both ends, like they look stereo and everything, but they're lacking a lot of bass, and I mean, most smartphones don't have much bass anyway, but these are really, really lacking to the point where my iPhone SE2 has better built-in speakers than this phone does. It's pretty bad. But I appreciate the fact that this is just a brick you can throw in a bag and be like, okay, if I want to watch some movies or download a bunch of stuff onto a phone that is going to last a long time and I'm not going to have to worry about charging for at least a week, this has been a pretty fun phone with a lot of gimmicky but unique features. You know, gimmicky doesn't always mean bad, and while it's hard to recommend to that many people, I do think that there is a niche of the market that would appreciate a thick chunk boy like this with no camera wobble when you put it down on a table, no case necessary because it's already built durable, and a battery life like 5 times better than most other phones out there. So, pretty interesting piece of technology that just recently went on sale. I don't believe it's for pre-order anymore. I'm pretty sure everybody can buy this. But what do you guys think of the idea of like making phones this thick? Yes, you can legally take it on a plane, by the way. I checked. Do you think there's a limit to how thick phones can get, even though we're using them more and more and spending so much time on our phones? You wish the iPhone would get this thick? Do you think integrating more like durability into the design is a good idea, or should we just focus on making pretty clean phones and then covering them up with our OtterBoxes the day we get them? Feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. This is your Help Sheep here, and I'll see you in the next one.